Hi, this is Alan from Warrendale Community Church, and we are continuing that series that we've started on proving the will of God, and we're touching on areas that are the danger of some freedoms. And so living the will of God requires a proper navigation through the waters of freedom and rights and liberties. That's what we already talked about. And then we jumped into chapter 10, where there's Paul goes through and explains various difficulties or things that could lead to destruction, and they are interconnected with the whole idea of freedoms. And it's kind of like those things before the freedoms, the exercise of freedom, but exercised in the wrong way may lead to sin, and we have to guard those particular areas. And so he sets up various examples, and he talks to us about them, and we need to be cautious about them. So he talked first about bad desires. The second one is in chapter 10, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, at verse 7. It talks about eating, drinking, and playing. It says, do not be idolaters, as some of them were, and as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Some of them went into idolatry because they wanted to eat, drink, and play in the wrong way. Here you have amusement. Here you have the idea of basic necessities or eating and drinking, but the way in which they carried on with them brought about a connection to idolatry. They wanted to amuse themselves, which was connected to a worship of a false god. They had the freedom to eat and drink, but their eating and drinking led to idolatry. They celebrated without God being the center, and or some other reason is the center, and this is that type of idolatry. Again, the freedom for amusement leads them to worship a false god. So the meaning of the word play is sport or jest, or to give way to hilarity, especially by joking and singing and dancing. As Thayer says, the root comes from being a child. They acted like kids. Basically, the idea is they acted unrestrained. Exodus 32:25 says the people were out of control. And it kind of brings it up in Exodus 32:19, explaining it. It says, it came about as soon as Moses came near the camp that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned it, and he threw the tablets from his hand and shattered them on the foot of the mountain. And so the thing is that here they are, again, freedom to eat, style of eating, but they were going in the wrong direction and led to idolatry, which led to their judgment. Another area is that of sexual sin. And those things which are before or get us close to the edge and then lead into sexual sin. It says in verse 8, nor let us act immorally as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. They acted immoral by playing the harlot with the daughters of Moab, pointed out in Numbers 25:1. Your liberties and cravings can lead to immorality if you don't guard yourself. Your lack of restraint and being delivered from the restrictions of slavery can unleash your attitude of freedom to get yourself involved in immorality. Sexual sin will lead to your fall. The possible freedom, say for instance, like to touch a woman or shake her hand, can lead to the wrong kind of touching. The freedom to have a massage or something like that has led people into sexual sin. The price of their immoral acts was falling by the judgment of God. This might be from even looking at wrong pictures and bringing about the slavery and the correction by punishment. So we have to realize the area of sexual sin, or those things even before that, that may have freedoms attached to it, have to be guarded. So let's look, and this is the warning, 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee immorality. Every sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. And yes, Christians can commit sexual sin and then will have to pay the consequences of that type of sinning against their body. Another area is testing the Lord. This is in verse 9. Nor let us try the Lord. It's actually try the Christ, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpent. We are not to test Christ by similar action as those in the Exodus did. We are not to test out the Lord Jesus Christ, to see if he will react to our complaining. They tried the Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord, and were destroyed. They put God to the test by asking for food according to their desires. That's how Psalm 78:18 says it. What is the difference between grumbling and trying the Lord? I mean, part of them are interconnected, but let's see if we can separate some of it. When you trust the Lord, you are below him. When you try the Lord, you position yourself above him. The attitude might be that God has to prove himself before you will trust. And it's by a testing of your making. We test him when he has to prove himself, and we don't trust him, and we keep demanding proof. These are other ways in which we try the Lord. Their form of destruction came by serpents. There seemed to be many manners of correction pointed out in the way in which sin is dealt with. Exodus chapter 17, verse 2 adds to this. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me?" That's the quarreling aspect. "Why do you test the Lord?" The testing was in a quarreling with Moses. The demand was that Moses was to give them water to drink. This is the demanding disposition that points out trying versus a requesting disposition and making it testing. We still test God when we demand his representatives in the wrong way. And these similar warnings will come up in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 22. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Are we? Numbers 21:5, the people spoke against God and Moses. "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we loathe this miserable food." Verse 6, the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many people of Israel died. They questioned their deliverance. They were given life, but they spoke about death. They refused to see the reason for being brought out of Egypt, and they didn't remember that. They said there was no food or water. It was just they didn't like the food. God had provided all the way up to this point, and they had survived. They said they didn't like this manna. Further about testing, we can be found in Matthew chapter 4, verse 6, and the testing related to Christ. And it says, Matthew chapter 4, verse 6, "And he said to him," this is Satan, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus' response in verse 7, Jesus said to him, "On the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." See, this testing was to throw yourself down and make God prove his word related to protection and his promises. This is where you become the evaluator of God and his faithfulness to his promises. This is testing God. This is not trusting God. Another one, back to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. At verse 10, it's about complaining. And verse 10 says, "Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer." These grumblers got destruction. The word grumble is to mutter and secretly whisper, and this is here used in a negative sense. Your complaining will lead to personal destruction. You will suffer loss, as it talks about in reward, if your pattern is complaining. He describes this destroyer. So who is the destroyer? The destruction came by means of the destroyer. This seems most likely an angel, if you look at Exodus 12:23 or 2 Chronicles 32:21. His quality of destroying labels him as the destroyer. The contrasted way that these people should be, instead of grumbling, is contentment. So one has to guard ourselves. One has to be careful about our opinion, that also that we have a right to say our opinion, and that could lead to grumbling and then lead to destruction. We have another thing that's brought up. Now, these things we just talked about and other things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the age has come. So this event relates to Israel. are designed to be instructive, not just informative, not just to be entertaining. These examples should teach us lessons to learn about how to live in our present time with our choices. So the thing is that they are not removed. Too often people say, well, they don't have the same spirit, or it's different, and that's just a way in which to disregard receiving any instruction related to this event. But it tells us in 1 Corinthians that it is supposed to be related to giving us instruction. The last of these to be warned about is self-confidence. This is in verse 12, 1 Corinthians 10:12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stand take heed that he does not fall. With freedom comes many possibilities of pride. The thinking you can stand has to do with handling freedoms without falling prey to them. This attitude is to assume your privileges will ensure your success without making wise choices in the area of freedoms. We are most likely to fall when we are most confident in our own strength. Just as with a caregiver, where it talks about dealing with a patient, supposedly they have a right to fall. So what happens is the believer needs to realize God can allow them to fall. They, in a sense, have a right to fall and experience the pain related to their personal choices. Don't think that somehow God's going to rescue you from the choices that you clearly made. If He chooses to, that's fine, but to assume that is to think you are going to stand and you will fall. So in conclusion, in dealing with this area of freedoms, this verse 13, must be connected to this. And this is talking about temptation. And the temptation is the pressure in the freedom. Remember, temptation itself is not a sin. It is a pressure to sin. And so freedoms, some of the pressures are related to the freedoms, rights, and our liberties. Temptation, as this verse says, verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape, so that you will be able to endure it. We see from this that temptations are common, they're not beyond our ability to handle, and they have a way of escape. Remember, God is faithful to limit the temptation and its pressure to endure, and escape are provided. We are to make personal choices to avoid being overtaken by it. So in the will of God, we have to be able to make proper choices in certain areas and certain ranges lead to sin, and we need to be guarded against those things that happen before that.